Hi, this is Andy. When I talk with listeners of the People and Projects podcast, I like to hear their why. When there are literally millions of podcasts available to you, why do you include this one in your mix? And what I hear most often is that you're just hungry for ideas on how to grow in your confidence to lead and deliver. And since the answer to almost every people-related question and situation is, it depends, it's helpful to get thoughts and ideas from a wide group of experts to help us all grow as leaders. Well, today I'm excited to add more voices to that discussion. Doug Lennick and Chuck Wachendorfer join us to talk about their new book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It. It's an insightful book packed with leadership lessons developed over decades. In today's discussion, it'll be clear that leadership isn't a matter of a title. We can all lead from where we are. You'll learn about what Doug and Chuck call the leadership logic chain and how that applies to you. You'll get some practical ideas on how to increase your self-awareness and decision-making. And before we're done, you'll even know what the freeze game is and how it can help you. There's so much more we're going to cover. I can't wait to share this discussion with you. Before we start, here's a quick question. Do you know someone who's in college or maybe recently graduated? Some people at that stage, they know exactly what they want to do with their career, but I continue to see a growing number of people who dread being asked the question, so what's your plan? Because when it comes to their career, they have no freaking idea. And I bring this up because we've recently released a new course entitled just that, No Freaking Idea, How to Navigate Career Uncertainty. It's a career guide for people of any age who are struggling with uncertainty about what they want to do, and the feedback on the course has been great. So whether it's you that's wondering about next steps in your career or a son or daughter that could use some perspective, learn more by going to nofreakingidea.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Doug and Chuck about their new book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It. Guys, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's interesting, Andy, as you were talking about somebody just recently graduating.
Yeah.
I'm a lot older than both you guys, and so I will say it reminded me in high school, one of the great shows, one of the great movies kind of launched Dustin Hoffman's career was called The Graduate.
Right.
And the answer to the question was plastics back
Right,
then.
that's right. Plastic. Actually, Doug, I know you're from Minneapolis. There was a guy I met once pretty far into his career, and he goes, sales. That's the answer. Sales. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do. It's sales. It reminded me of that plastics comment.
Yeah, plastics.
Hey, before we get into the book, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about the two of you, and here's how I want to do it. Doug, in what ways are you and Chuck similar and different in your styles and approaches? And then Chuck, I'll ask if you agree and how those similarities and differences impacted the co-authoring of this book. So, Doug, that's kind of out of the blue question, but you said you're feeling clever.
No, I like that question. Here's where we're similar. I think we're similar in our belief that everyone is a leader and everyone is a follower. We are similar in our understanding that what we do as human beings is observed by other human beings and it influences them. And therefore we need to be thoughtful about the influence we have on others. That's the leadership all of us have, 100% of everybody listening. So that's where we're similar. Where we're different is Chuck's background. He went to school for engineering, and I kind of was a hodgepodge guy, and I'm a little bit more. I came from more of the philosophical, social style of it all, and the combination of the engineering and which is a little bit brings a little more discipline to guys like me, was very helpful. So that's a difference. But what we've learned is, and one of our mentors, a guy now deceased, Roy Gear, used to talk about the partnership of differences, and the way you get synergy is to be different, not to be identical. And so we have common interests and common beliefs, but then we have different ways we go about it. And then when you look at these various profiles, he's more of I'll just say he's a stronger personality, and I'm a more laid back guy. But I'm energetic. I don't know if
Yeah. So
how
Chuck,
Chuck would describe
we'll
it,
see
but
if you
that
agree.
I'll stop there and just
Yeah.
shut up.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
And
But
then Chuck, after you agree or disagree or pull out anything of how did that impact the co-authoring of the book?
Well, I think I'll say this. Doug is being very modest. Doug sees things that other people don't see, including myself. And so how that translated in the book was, I think, he helped formulate the idea of the book. A lot of these ideas we have been practicing for a while. And a lot of them originated with Doug's thinking. What I brought to the table was kind of the practical, kind of like, how do we pull the book together? How are we going to write this book? Who's going to write what? So the kind of the logistics of it all was something that, who we're going to interview for the book. So there was that, like as Doug's saying, there was the marriage of differences. What he's good at is what I'm not good at. He sees things I don't see. He has ideas I don't have. And then I'm able to say, I got it. Like I'm able to see it once he explains it to me, and then we were able to actually make it happen.
Yeah, that's cool. That it just shows the power of diversity at that level. Of you don't have to be clones of each other, and that's a good message for all of us. Yeah, yeah. I was immediately drawn to your book just based on the title, because we can so easily think that a problem is someone else's problem to fix, right? Yet you're clear in the book that we're leaders not just because of titles. So, Doug, what are some examples of where we have opportunities to lead, but maybe don't even realize that's the case?
Well, there are little examples all the time. I mean, I look at um, our opportunities. I'll give you one. Yesterday, I went to the Minnesota State Fair. And I went with one of my grandchildren and my daughter and her husband, and we had an opportunity throughout the course of the day just to uh, be reasonable participants at the fair. So what happens at the fair is you have all these people from all kinds of places, and it's this melting pot of folks that are all there to have a good time. Some of them handle that less well than others.
Right.
But one of the things that I find in opportunities like that is it's an opportunity to be kind to everybody that you see. It's an opportunity to, in my case, to help my granddaughter experience all these people and the role that each of us plays with them. And we went in and saw the animals and the opportunity to realize that we have a part in everything. And the state fair is a place where that shows that. And so that was an opportunity where we got to lead by just being there. So you don't have to go somewhere to lead. You have to be someone wherever you are. And so how one conducts oneself will influence everything and everyone around them. So when I get on an elevator, as an example, I want everybody on the elevator to be smiling before we get off. And so I do things to help that happen. That's leadership. That's influencing, because I know that positive emotions are to the mind as daylight is to the daylily. And so if I can help someone feel a little bit better, it's going to help them have a better day, and that's going to make the world a better place. It's a very simple.
I love it. My dad was just like that as well. Even though my dad was an introvert, he would just, he never met a stranger. We'd be at a salad bar and he'd start a conversation with somebody. Yeah. Yeah. Chuck, can you think of any examples of where we might not even realize this is an opportunity to lead?
Well, we talk about decision making in the book, and the Hay Group's done research to show that decision making has twice the impact on our performance than talent and skill combined. So, back to kind of piling on a little bit of what Doug was saying is, it doesn't have to be me saving the world. It doesn't have to be me fixing global warming. It could be me making a decision, a better decision in my own life that helps me be more connected and more aligned with my values. We talk about values in the book. Values are things that we, aspire to be, that we hold important. And so if I understand that my decisions matter, that my life today is the sum of the decisions I made over the last 63 years, then all of a sudden you start to place more focus and attention on decision making. But making a decision based on what? Well, based on my values. Mm-hmm. So is what I'm about to do right now aligned with who I hope to be? Yeah. Knowing that is really important. Most people, when you ask them if they have values, act kind of insulted. like you think they must have values. Yeah. But that leads to the second question, which is, Andy, what are they? Yeah. Right? And so if values are really important and I have them, I should know what they are. Mm-hmm. If I know my values and I can remember them, then I can use them making choices every single day. Could be whether I eat cookies for lunch or eat a piece of fruit. It could be whether I take the stairs versus the elevator. It could be how I treat somebody in the elevator, which is what Doug is describing. I mean, all of those are conscious choices that we make that a lot of times we don't think about.
Yeah, nothing to do with an org chart, nothing to do with the title. I find I'm a new grandpa. We have one that just turned 1 and one that's like 8 weeks when we're recording this. And I find it's an opportunity to lead there in terms of empowerment. Am I going to be the grandpa's like, no, sons, you need to do it this way? Or is it like cheer them on and empower them? And, there's the opportunities to lead, to squash, to encourage, to.
Go back to my state fair yesterday. I got to be a grandfather, a father, a father-in-law, all of those things. Those are all leadership roles. So I was the dad to my daughter. I was the grandfather to my granddaughter. I was the father-in-law to my son-in-law, who also happens to work here. So I'm his boss. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm all those things all at one time. Yeah. And we take that seriously. And what Chuck was talking about is really important. And we talk about 8 essentials, our subtitle related to don't wait for someone else to fix it. But the very first essential to enhance your leadership impact is aim to be your ideal self. If Andy Kaufman is the best Andy Kaufman, I'm going to bet his podcasts are good. I'm going to bet he's a really good grandfather. I'm going to bet he's a really good husband and a really good a dad. I'm going to bet that he's just like pretty effective in everything that he does, because ideally we're all wonderful. It's just that really we aren't always wonderful. But if we aim to be our ideal self, and our values represent that. So my values represent, ideally, I am going to every day honor my values: family, happiness, wisdom, integrity, service, health, every day, all day, ideally. And that's why the second essential is know your real self. And you mentioned you're going to learn the freeze game. That's part of it. Yeah. Know who you really are. Yeah. And if I know who I'm aiming to be, and I know that who I am right now is on target, I'm going to keep firing. And if I'm off target, I'm going to get realigned. It's a very simple but not easy process.
Yeah, and I like the reality of what you're saying is we aspire, but it's impossible as humans to always hit it. But the first step in the whole leadership logic chain, as I recall from the book, is self-awareness. And Doug, I'll start with you on this one. Emotional intelligence starts at that same place. I think it's wise that you start with self-awareness. The only thing is, I'm a wonderful person, if you ask me. I'm leading perfectly, if you ask me. Right? And so I think it's difficult sometimes to get a clear glimpse of ourselves. And Doug, you share a deeply personal story in the book for what it took for you to get a better idea of where you were at one point in your life, right? So if you'd be up for it, I'd love for you to share that. And then Chuck, I'd love to hear any insights you have on how we can all get a better sense of who we are.
Yeah, well, I'll share I'm a recovering alcoholic. And so I can share with you, and I became aware of my alcoholism during the process of writing this book. So Chuck can share his experiences about it, and I can share mine. But I can say that living in alignment, we talk about the most effective leaders live in alignment and on purpose. So what they do is with a purpose and it's intentional. So it's on purpose and with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going about my life. My values were intact, but I was kind of like the frog in the water. As the water was heating up, I didn't notice it and I didn't jump out. And the pandemic wasn't good for me. I was part of the group that helped liquor sales go up. So I was in that group. And as the pandemic wore on, the real year 2020 was my qualifying year. I call it my qualifying year. You have to qualify to go to Hazelden. They don't just let anybody in. And so I fully qualified, and so I recognize that all of us have something that we're carrying around with us. In my case, it happened to me late in life. I mean, very late. Chuck is 63 years old. The year my mom turned 63 is the year that she was killed as a result of a car accident. When I turned 63, I didn't realize how difficult that had been for me. I just kind of stuffed it. But when I hit that age, I thought, I wasn't very thoughtful, but I realized, geez, mom was really young. Because at the time when she died, I mean, she was my mom. And even though she was young, she was still my mom. And I thought, well, that's the way it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to die before your children. But 63 is real young. And so I realized that. And I started to drink a little bit more. And I started to drink alcohol, hard alcohol instead of soft, or instead of beer, soft alcohol. So as a result of that, I discovered that I needed to get back to the basics. And interestingly, my son Alan, who works with us at Think to Perform, and the family had a little bit of what's called an intervention with me. And this thing that finally broke through, and this speaks to the power of our tools. He said, Dad, you're out of alignment.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the other stuff I was successfully deflecting, which good alcoholics do. You know, if you're a really good alcoholic, which all alcoholics are good at it, or you don't get to make it. So you're a good alcoholic, but good alcoholics are victims. They've got reasons for everything, and they think they're fine. I'm under control until you accept that. So I had to use my own tools. And so what I recognized is this tool book that we've written works for all kinds of people. For those of you that are listening that happen to have a concern about an addiction, it'll work for you, but it's not written to alcoholics, but it certainly will work for alcoholics. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to comment more, but Chuck experienced it. And I will say my team was great. I went in and they all stepped up. I went to treatment for 4 weeks. They supported me, and they've supported me since. And I think I've come back better than ever. So I'm on a personal growth spurt, and I'm going to be 72 on my next birthday, and I'm excited. Yeah, and I hope everybody buys the book just to read about my story. Yeah. I'm a drunk.
High five. Yeah, well, high five from Chicago, because I feel like too many books, people are not willing to be transparent. And so what I took away from it, and this goes beyond alcoholism, but one way self-awareness works is when people care enough for you that they tell you. Right. And so that's what you had. But sometimes we're not surrounded by people that tell us what we need to hear. So, Chuck, do you have any other insights on how can we get a better sense of who we are if we want to develop our self-awareness?
Well, living in alignment, as Doug says from time to time, is not a lifetime achievement award. And part of the human condition is we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so the point behind knowing my values and paying attention to who I am really is that I ideally would make decisions consistent with what's important to me.
Yeah.
But when I don't, I can see it a little faster. And to the point you're making, Andy, even if I don't see it,
Right.
other people who care about me, like the reason Al made the statement, Doug's son made the statement, is he knew his dad's values.
Right.
That's how he knew he was out of alignment. Like he's like, so if I share my values with people that have a vested interest in seeing me be more ideal more often, they're going to hopefully call my attention to when I'm out of sync. I think, even one of the stories in the book that in my own life where I was out of alignment, my then wife called my attention to it. It wasn't even my own self-awareness. It was her calling my attention to, you say you're worn out and exhausted a lot.
Yeah.
Right? And I even at that point, I was in denial. But, and I noticed how often I said it when people say, how you doing? I'll be like, I'm stressed, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. I was like, well, she's right. And then I started to pay attention to why was I worn out and exhausted? So that's to your point, Andy, it all begins with self-awareness. None of us is 100% self-aware 100% of the time. And so we need things like the freeze exercise, which is practicing self-awareness. It's a habit of self-awareness. We need enablers, people who care about us, to point out when we don't see it, to help us make a corrective action like Doug did or I did.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, let's hit it because we've kind of teased about the freeze game, right?
Sure.
So would you explain it and how you've seen it help in situations?
So part of the human experience is these three pieces of thoughts, feelings, and actions. So as human beings, we're always thinking, right? Even trying not to have a thought as a thought. We're linear thinkers. We think one thought at a time. Emotions, we feel more than one thing at a time. So I can be happy and sad, nervous and excited. And then actions are either voluntary or involuntary. So speaking is a voluntary action. Blinking or breathing would be involuntary. So we're always thinking, always feeling, always doing. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Being in the zone is being physically, mentally, and emotionally present. So you talk to any professional athlete that's worth the millions they're being paid, and you say, hey, Andy, what do you think about winning the Super Bowl? What do you think about winning the Stanley Cup? Andy's going to say, I'm not worried about the Super Bowl. I'm worried about the next game, the next play, the next quarter, right? That's being present. And so self-awareness is about being physically, mentally, and emotionally present. What am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? And if I notice I'm thinking about something else while I'm talking to you, I can then make a choice, which is the second rung in the leadership logic chain. I can decide to pay attention, right? And that leads to self-management. I change my behavior. I put my phone down. I turn it off. I'm not looking at email. I'm paying attention to our conversation. That affects my connection with you and my ability to influence you. So it's self-awareness leads to better choices. Better choices leads to me managing my behavior, which improves my influence with other people. And so those are the 4 steps of the leadership logic chain, which we talk about in the book. And it's counterintuitive that for me to build a great relationship with you, the person I have to pay the most attention to is me.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the thing that we have fun with in front of live audiences, and your audience, maybe we can have some fun with it. But for those that are sitting out there giving this some thought, it's worth considering the notion that people who lack self-awareness, of course, do not know. I mean, that's problematic in our system. Most people overassess their self-awareness. Like, I don't know if this has ever happened, Andy, to you, but I know at times in my life I have found myself reading a compelling book like our own, and I get to the end of a chapter and I wonder, what did I just read? I don't know if you've ever done that, but an article or a book. Well, imagine that. Now that's you reading to yourself and not paying attention. So that's how little aware we often are. So what we try to help people understand is if you practice paying attention to yourself, it'll become a habit. And so when you start the chapter, at the end of the first sentence, you will already know if you're paying attention or not. And if you're not paying attention, you now can make a choice. So what we did is we created this 4Rs thing, and this would speak to one of your questions, how do we co-create? The 4Rs was a co-creation, Chuck and I. I wanted 3Rs because I grew up reading, writing, arithmetic. So I wanted something like that. And Chuck kept saying, no, it doesn't work because I had recognize, reflect, respond. And the reframe came from Chuck. No, we got to rethink this thing. So there's going to be 4. Oh, so we have 4, and the 4 are correct. And then I wrote an article with a guy who had his own 4, and we ended up with 6, and that was nonsense. And so, I mean, it was still a good article, but too many. In that case, 4 is ideal. So the 4Rs. But that's the concept, and it all starts with self-awareness. And it really is, Chuck said it, I'll just emphasize, add to it punctuation, which is how effective I am at influencing you, relating to you, leading you. How effective I am at any of that has everything to do with how effective I am at managing me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most people don't get that.
Yeah.
But if we get that, and the answer to that question, how will I know I'm managing myself well? That's where the tool, the alignment model, comes in. And so that's the whole enchilada all in one thing.
Yeah. Since we don't see ourselves objectively, like right now, the three of us, we can see each other if we look into, the avatar, but we don't, day to day, we don't see it. So what I love about the freeze game idea, and I don't know if our listeners completely get it. It's like, you can stop yourself, just go freeze, just like right now, just freeze real quick. It's almost like take a pulse. It's almost like a forced interruption.
How am I feeling? What am I doing? We advocate doing this, 5, 6, 7 times a day, every day for the rest of your life, because it's this habit of practicing self-awareness. People have heard that self-awareness is important. What we take it down to is how do you get better at self-awareness?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where the freeze helps.
It feels a little bit to me like a lane assist in the cars, Like I'm not real fond of that feature, when it grabs the wheel. But there's a sense of before we steer off the road emotionally or through our actions, if we could just go, wait, freeze, real quick. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing? Is that aligned? And can I make a better choice? And just imagine if we did that as parents, as leaders, as individuals.
It doesn't take long. You're talking about 30 seconds, maybe.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And depending on the situation, it might even be faster. Yeah, that's a good point. So, Doug, you mentioned
you get better and better. You get better and better and better, and pretty soon, because what most people are pretty nice people. Because, like you said earlier, Andy, I'm a great guy, really. I mean, I'm like a wonderful guy, But the same wonderful guy will occasionally have an unpleasant interaction on a freeway. Right. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, hypothetical.
But what happens is we in the moment we get overcome, and whether it's on the freeway or somewhere else, and we snap at our spouse or a child, and we feel bad about it, and then we say we're sorry. Which is nice. That's what nice people do, is they say they're sorry. And what we are helping ourselves do, because you can't give away that which you do not have. So I'm trying to master myself so that I can help others master themselves, so that instead of doing something that I would label regretful, that I would later apologize for, what I want to be so good at, this freeze game, that I catch myself before I do the regretful behavior. And I just skip it. And then I say to you, Andy, I just want you to know I was going to do something regretful, and I was going to say I'm sorry to you. I want you to know I would have apologized, but I just skipped yelling at you. I just skipped it. But I would have been sorry. So for those people who like saying I'm sorry, just say I was about to do something I would have been sorry for. I skipped it, and I'm sorry. So you can still apologize. But the idea is let's master ourselves so that we actually make a decision regardless of how we feel. So the emotion doesn't have to be right for us to do right. If you want to feel better, do better, you'll feel better. A lot of people are waiting to feel better to do better. And what we're saying is do it the other way around. Think better, do better, you'll feel better.
I like it. Yeah.
And that's what Chuck said. It's decision making.
Yeah. I
Think
like it.
to perform. We named a company after that.
Yeah, I know where that came from now. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Doug, you emphasize in the book the importance of integrity and responsibility when it comes to our ability to lead, and you put those together. So those are terms I think we nod our head at, but what do you specifically mean by integrity and responsibility, and what are the connections there?
Well, first of all, when we talk about igniting integrity and responsibility, we're talking about two separate moral principles, but they work together. Integrity is a moral principle, responsibility is a moral principle. And what we're talking about is not simply the principle, but the behavioral manifestation of it. So what does integrity in action look like? And let me start by saying what it doesn't look like. It's more than not lying. Not lying is as easy as not speaking. So if I don't say anything, I won't have lied, obviously. I didn't say anything. But it doesn't mean I behaved with integrity. Behavioral integrity is a behavior. That involves things like telling the truth. Oh, so that's I'm now speaking. So when I speak, I shouldn't lie. Correct. So telling the truth is integrity. Recognizing that if I live in alignment with my values, that's integrity. I'm aligning, keeping my promises is integrity. So integrity shows up in real behaviors. You know, one of the guys that endorsed our book, who's a friend of Chuck's, is Stephen M. R. Covey, Stephen R. Covey's son. And I've met Stephen M. R., but Chuck knows him better. But he talks about the speed of trust in some of his work. And he endorsed our work because we're all about absolutely, you do not have a sustainable proposition if you don't ignite integrity. And responsibility is I am responsible for my own mistakes. And a lot of leaders really don't like to step up. I mean, you asked me about my own vulnerability. I own that. That's mine. And I'm not ducking it. And I find that people who can't accept responsibility for their own mistakes are not especially as inspiring, and I personally have a hard time wanting to follow them because everybody, Chuck said it, everybody makes mistakes. Our good late friend Larry Wilson used to refer to all of us as FHBs, fallible human beings, and we are indeed that. But as responsible human beings, we are responsible to actually make a difference. We're responsible for serving others. That means we're responsible to not wait for somebody else to fix it. We see it, and that's why we talk about ignite that sense of responsibility so that you actually do something beyond recognizing something needs to be done, and I sure hope somebody else does something.
That's good. So, Chuck, here's my question, because at this point, I'm guessing that no one listening to us goes, oh, man, I'm so glad we had this conversation because I have a real integrity problem, right? Or I have a real problem taking responsibility. But I think we do, more than we realize. So, Chuck, any thoughts about some ways we could more clearly assess and maybe strengthen our commitment to integrity and responsibility?
Yeah, we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. Other people judge us by our behavior, right? It's like, well, that's not what I meant to say. That's not what I meant to do. That's where we say, I'm sorry. So I think it's really about where the freeze game helps us so much is we really get to pay attention to our behavior. And you think about people in your own life that have poor relationships. Oftentimes it's because they lack awareness. They're not being honest with themselves. If I'm not being honest with myself, it's going to be very difficult for me to be honest with anybody else. I'm not saying I can't. I'm just saying people see the disconnect. They see the hypocrisy. Well, you're calling out my failings, but you're really dishonest with yourself. And we have a saying at Think to Perform, there's no end to getting better. Living in alignment is not a lifetime achievement award. I may have a great day today and fall off the wagon tomorrow, and have a bad day where I didn't live in alignment, or I snapped at people. I let my emotions get the best of me. So it's just because I was good today doesn't mean that's going to be the case tomorrow, which comes with responsibility. Right? And so if I get that, like, tomorrow's a different day than today, like, I still have to practice the freeze exercise. I still have to think about my values. I have to be careful about the choices I'm making to make sure they're aligned with the outcome that I want to create and the values that I say are important to me. When I really grasp that, then it's a journey, not a destination. I'm always practicing this stuff. So as much as Doug and I hope that this book impacts other people around the world, as we wrote the book, it was a chance for us to also re-engage and have that touchstone with our own tools in our own lives.
Yeah, every time someone like you, Andy, invites us to talk, it deepens our own understanding of our own tool.
Yeah. No,
So, and you, I'm sure, have done it throughout your career. You've had a great career, and you understand one of the great ways to learn something is to teach it.
Right. That's so true. That is so true. Yeah. Chuck, you mentioned earlier, it came up about the importance of decision making, and how even our ability to do that well overrides talent and effort and things like that. What are some of the barriers to better decision making? And then after that, Doug, I'd love for you to add in any other lessons you've learned about making better decisions. Well, let's start with barriers.
Two big categories of barriers, and they're big. One are emotions. When we get emotional, our emotions sacrifice accuracy for speed. They want us to respond very quickly and are usually wrong. So the worst time to make any important decision is when we're emotional. We're hardwired to be emotionally reflexive. So when my body feels something, it wants me to respond very quickly. It's emote. I feel something, my body wants me to respond. But the emotions sacrifice accuracy for speed. So the opportunity that we teach in the book is to go from being emotionally reflexive to becoming emotionally reflective. I recognize how I'm feeling by playing the freeze. I know how to calm myself down by reflecting on what's important to myself. When I'm calm, I can think more clearly and evaluate other options besides the one that the path I was initially going to go down. That enables me to hopefully make a better choice. So it's going from being emotionally reflexive to being emotionally reflective. The second category are biases that we have, psychological patterns, biases, heuristics, and framing effects. These are all things, psychological traps that we have where confirmation bias. What's confirmation bias? When making a decision, I talk to people that think like I do to validate a decision I've already made. I mean, I don't care if you're red or blue. How long can you watch the other channel before you're convinced they're idiots?
Right.
It's less than 5 minutes.
Right.
That's confirmation bias.
Yeah. For sure.
Right? So when making a decision, if I know I suffer from that, I could talk to people that don't think like I do, that might disagree with my point of view, maybe help me learn something, something I hadn't thought of, right? So, and framing effects have to do with what just happened to us affect how we see the future. So if I just had I just lost money in the stock market, that's going to affect how I view investing in the market moving forward. And then heuristics are mental shortcuts, things that we use to make decisions quickly. During periods of stability, they work. During periods of dynamic change, they get us into trouble. So what I have to be aware of are, what are the assumptions I'm using, and are they still valid? Because in many cases, they're not. Right? So we think,
Right.
one of the examples we use is when people think about the rest of their lives. When they think about retirement, what's the age most people think about? 65.
Right.
Do you know where that came from? Not Social Security came from Germany in the 1870s. Germany put in place the first pension plan in 1878. Do you know what life expectancy was in 1878?
A lot younger,
47.
right? Yeah.
47. When Social Security used it in the 30s, life expectancy was 61. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't retire at 65. I'm just saying when people retired 50 years ago and retired at 65, they were dead by 72. That's not the case anymore. So you have to rethink the rest of your lives. I'm 63. I can't even imagine retiring in 2 years.
Yeah.
My dad had a heart attack and retired at 65. I'm not even close to either one of those things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be 72. I'm still working. And one of our guys that we know out of Rochester, Minnesota, the guy named Mitch Anthony, and he came up with the term, I think he coined the term protirement. We don't retire anymore, we protire. And I was on the phone this morning with the guy wrote the foreword to our book, Richard Leiter. Richard just turned 79, and he's about to go climbing. He's going to spend a couple of weeks climbing around the Alps at age 79.
Love it.
And
That's great.
and so it's a matter of actually getting out, doing all this stuff that Chuck's talking about.
Well, let me build on that one, because you had the chapter on letting go of what you know, and that's really about keep learning. Now, combined, like each of you have decades. I'm not saying you're old, okay, but you have decades of lessons that have been learned, and at so many levels. How do you, and let's start with Doug. How do you try to let go, even now, with all you know, and try to stay agile with your learning? What do you do, Doug? And then Chuck, I'd love for you to share.
Well, I will. You can see it on my wall in my office. There's a print of a painting by Goya, who was, I don't know what even century it was in, but it's called On Aprendo, which is, and yet I'm still learning. It's just this elderly man in this print, and my father has on his gravestone the words, and yet I am still learning. My point of view on this is pretty simple in that I start with imagining everything I know is in a dot. So if everybody listening or watching puts a dot on a piece of paper, imagine everything you know is in that dot. And then everything you are aware you don't know touches the dot. So you decide, I better get to know that stuff I don't know. And so you expand your dot into a circle. And so now everything that I know is in that circle. And everything that I'm aware that I don't know touches the circle. And then I keep growing, just like a tree with those rings on the tree. What happens is the more I know, the more I become aware. I don't know anything. And so letting go of what I know is a lot easier now that I am so aware of how much I don't know. And so it starts with being curious. So start with be curious. And a lot of people are not. They actually don't care. They want to just settle in on what they have decided. I know this and I want to stop, damn it. I want to stop here. I don't want to keep learning that there's other ways to do things. I want it done this way. Not only do I want to do it this way, I would actually like everybody to do it this way.
Right.
And then we will all be right, because I already know. And that's very dangerous. So be careful with the people who know. Knowing is the enemy of learning. And And so I don't know very much, but one of the things I know is I don't know very much. And that's a relief. That's a relief because it allows me to be curious. And Chuck said this earlier, there's no end to better. I must tell you, for those of your listeners and viewers that are like me in the 70 plus, it's exciting to embrace the coming years. I am excited knowing there is no end to better. I intend fully whenever I transition into what's next, I plan to be dying on my learning deathbed. I don't intend to be done. I still will be undone, and then we'll go with what goes next. That's the deal.
I love it. I love it, Doug. I love it. I love that attitude. Yep, that's good. Chuck, how do you stay sharp? I mean, you could just sit back with your dot and say that's gotten me really far. How do you keep expanding it?
I enjoy learning. I think to the point that Doug was making is, as an engineer, you mentioned my background in engineering. Engineering is about asking questions and challenging assumptions, and so I think I was trained that. But back to something Doug was saying earlier, the reason people hold on so hard to what they know is there's anxiety that comes with not knowing. Right? When uncertainty increases our lives, like it did with COVID, it has an impact on our stress level and our anxiety. That doesn't feel good to me. I'd rather stick with what I know because I don't have to deal with the anxiety. But I think if you can recognize that about yourself when you're getting defensive, focus on asking more questions. Help me understand. Tell me more. So you can really open yourself up to learning. Then you realize it's not as scary as holding on to what you think you know and resisting any kind of a change. And I think, not to be too political, but I think that's some of what we lost in this country is the ability to discuss different ideas without making somebody wrong.
Right. Yeah. So we stay in our bubble and surround ourselves with people who look like us, think like us, worship like us, and we don't get that exposure. Yeah. I agree. I think it's easy to just, let me say it this way. I don't think most people go around saying, I don't want to learn anything more. I don't want to. I mean, I don't think they consciously even realize they've gotten in that bubble, right? And so you almost have to force yourself, like you share in your book about how you've created ways to try to get more diversity in your organization. You kind of are forcing yourself to try to keep learning. I think AI is one of those topics right now that a lot of people are like, I don't need to.
Company, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. Somebody in their 20s listening to us might be like, you guys are just a bunch of old people, but I'm telling you, you're going to be here someday. and if we can all realize there's no end to better, right? If you can always take that mindset, I think it's a beautiful mantra to live by. Yeah. Let me ask this, because there's so many other things I'd love to talk to you guys about, but let's end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast, and you mentioned a couple times in the book that some of these leadership lessons actually start in the home. So Chuck, let's start with you. Can you think of things from the book that parents could apply in their role at home?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Andy. Years ago when my children were younger, I got asked, first of all, my kids have all gone through the values exercises, I'm sure Doug's have. So we used to have their values on the refrigerator at home. And when their friends would come over, they'd obviously run to the refrigerator to get something to eat or drink, and they'd see the values listed on the refrigerator, and they'd go, "What's that?" And I'd explain it to them, and they'd go, "Well, can I do that?" And I've been asked to speak at high schools and middle schools about values. And I'll tell you, as kids get older, what they want to know is what do I want my life to look like? I know what my parents want my life to look like, but what's important to me? And they love the values card exercise. So as a parent, take your kids through the values exercise. What you hope as a parent is they make great decisions. I mean, that's what we yell at our kids as they walk out the door. Make great choices, right? And well, how do they make great choices if they don't know their values? So taking them through the values exercise increases the odds for all of us, not just our children, that they make better choices. And it's a great discussion. Well, why did you pick these values? I mean, I did the values exercise with my parents years ago. My dad's going to be 90 this year. When I did the values exercise with my dad, I was like, oh, that's how he sees the world. Like,
That explains
I've known
things.
my dad my entire life.
Right.
And it was like a breakthrough moment for me. Like, oh, that's why he does what he does.
Yeah, that's good. I love it. And people need to get a copy of the book to understand the details of that. But it's a very practical exercise. Doug, I mean, there's countless things I think from the book, but what's something that comes to mind for you, Doug, of something from the book that parents could apply in their role at home?
That applies at home and with children. And I mean, the what Chuck just said is absolutely true. One of the things that we find almost always, we do a lot of training in this in our general day-to-day work, and what often happens, we're hired to help people with their business, but often people apply the tools in their personal lives first, which is kind of an interesting thing. And so one of the things that I would say is the most important thing is to, when you're actually, when a parent is interacting with a child, it is worthy of one's consideration to try to understand as opposed to try to be understood. So what parents are preoccupied with is getting their point across. And as a result, they don't know what their child is dealing with. They're thinking, I don't have time to know what your problem is. Let me tell you the answer to your problem. So we just don't have time to talk about the problem. I have the solution. Well, it turns out that works not well on adults, and it doesn't work well on children. And so what we find is the freeze game applied to an interaction with a family member is extremely powerful. When we recognize this, talk about the triangle of thought, emotion, and physical experience. What we need to at least consider, the science says this, and for those who don't believe in science, they can disregard this. But what the science says is when our reality is stimulated from the outside, so something happens outside of us, it's going to stimulate us emotionally first. And so when we're interacting with somebody else, so as I am speaking to the two of you and to the audience, I am talking, you're experiencing me, and the first thing your brain is doing is processing it emotionally. And so it feels that. And so in dealing with our children, it's useful to understand that what we do, what we say, how we do what we do, and how we say what we say, the emphasis we put on the syllable, all of that is going to determine initially how our child is feeling. So parents, here's your opportunity. Next time you interact with your child, before the interaction, ask yourself these questions. How do I want my daughter to feel? What do I want my daughter to think? What would I want my daughter to do? And then ask yourself this question. What can I think and what can I do even though I'm upset? What can I think? What can I do that will increase the probability of my child, my daughter, receiving my message? But I'm going to start with seeking first to understand her as opposed to have her understand me. And so this recognition moment is really critical, and this challenging oneself. So on my way home, if I've had a difficult day, most people don't realize, when they come home from a difficult day, they can destroy a household. They're not thinking to themselves, like, I've had a difficult day. I don't care what kind of day these people have had. It's about to get worse. They don't think that, but they behave that way. And what we're saying is if you're going to interact with your loved ones, pay attention to them, seek to understand where they're at. That's empathy. Empathy is understanding somebody else. Compassion, empathy is feeling it. Compassion is doing something. As we say in the book, compassion is empathy in action. So we talk about embracing the two together. Empathy is I understand my daughter, and compassion is I'm actively trying to do something about it, and it isn't trying to control her. Because try to control yourself, you'll have plenty of trouble.
Right.
So parents are remarkable in the leap of faith that we take. I think I can control my children in spite of the fact that I know I can't control myself. That's nonsense. So with that, I rest my case.
That's good. I appreciate that advice. For those listening, you're a leader regardless of your title. And we have just barely touched on what's in this book. If you resonated with this discussion, get a copy of Doug and Chuck's new book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So Doug and Chuck, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Been great. Little slice of heaven.